Okay, here I'm going to show you a few groundwork exercises you can use before you get on. Our goal is going to be to separate the haunches from the hip and the hip from the haunches. First, I'm asking for a turn on the forehand. Dario is pretty good at this. He's very keen to move that haunches around, and he respects that aid quite a lot. Here, he took a step forward, so I asked him to rein back. He wasn't very much paying attention, so I had to tap him on the chest. I'm going to the other hip now as well. I kind of bounce back and forth from side to side. He took a step forward, so I tapped him on the shoulder, the chest area. Watch my eye. I keep my eye trained on that hip. When I want that hip to move, the first thing I do is I go and I look at it. Horses can really feel the pressure from where you're looking, and so it's important to keep that in mind. I'm just asking him to do a little rein back, pay attention. I give him a warning here. He doesn't really listen, so he gets tapped on the chest. Again, I'm looking at the hip this way, saying, hey. I think he actually might get a tap here, a small tap on the hip to say, pay attention. They always get a warning, though, first before they get a tap. It's important, as we sensitize them to our aids, that we give them an opportunity to do it right the first time. So again, I'm looking at his hip. I just bounce back and forth. He's very good at this. It's hard to kind of show a training video of that for someone because he's very keen to move that haunches off of pressure. He picked that up very quickly. So here I'm going to ask the forehand to move around the haunches. So a turn on the haunches. We're going to ask that forehand to cross over. And I'm using the whip pointing towards his nose. This is more of like a rope halter technique, but at whip comes a little swooshing motion towards his nose. Ideally, you want him to cross over in front, not cross over behind, so that front leg that's coming over crosses in front of the other front leg, not behind it. But if it does come behind it, don't panic. Just add a little cluck, like that was behind. So I cluck and I fix it on the next step. It's important to pat them every time you get a step that you like. Initially, I would aim to get one step at a time and then reward with a pat every time they do it. Dario's a bit more trained, so I tend to go for 2 or 3 steps at a time before stopping for a reward. But in the beginning, definitely be happy with just one. And you've got to be quick to say good job. That way they learn much faster and appreciate the positive feedback. Here I'm going to move to the rail. Using a fence line can be really helpful when controlling the haunches. If I don't want the haunches to come forward, come backwards or swing too much side to side, you can use a rail as just a little bit of a guide. I'm going to change the positioning of the whip to his shoulder because this is a little more applicable to what it would be like to ride. So I'm putting the whip on the shoulder, asking the shoulder to move, pausing to say good boy every time he takes a step. I'm going to reposition him. I ask for just one more step, I guess, and a good pat. Come back to the rail positioning, and I just bounce back and forth. Even if my one direction was not perfect, I go for the other direction and just go back and forth. On his shoulder, his haunches move. I don't panic. I just keep asking, and then I say, good boy. That was a good step. There, and then he does it again. Good boy. So the goal is to get just that shoulder to move off the pressure and for his hind end to stay still here. It's harder than it might seem. He's kind of stepping on himself. I would definitely recommend bell boots for an exercise like this. Sometimes he doesn't fully cross over. He just kind of makes contact with his other foot, and I was glad that there was bell boots on. So he got a little correction. He came too far forward, so I tapped him on the chest for him to rein back. That's why you kind of practice the rein back first, so you know you have that in your toolbox. Asking him to move. That's a good step. Good boy. Good step. Come on. He crosses behind. I don't panic. I just cluck, right? A little, so they could take a step forward and not behind themselves. Asking again here. Haunches are kind of moving. Don't panic. Keep asking. He goes backwards for a second, so I take the whip to his hip to say, no, don't go backwards. Try again. That's a good step. That's a good step. Good boy. Haunches swings a little bit. I make a small correction and then fix him again and square him back up. So here I'm going to ask for more of a walking turn on the haunches. I'm moving that shoulder. Finally, he figures it out. So I had to make a little bit of a correction there and stick to my task until he remembered what I was asking. So I'm keeping that nose bent a bit more towards me on purpose and keeping that whip at the shoulder because that's, again, a little more applicable to what it would be like to be in the saddle. So this is a good example of my walking turn on the haunches. Like I said, I'm asking that shoulder to move and cross over. Sometimes he'll still cross behind, but I don't panic. I just cluck at him. And that's okay if that haunches moves here. It just has to move in a smaller circle than the shoulder. The main thing is I'm keeping my eye on his front legs to make sure they cross over. And that's it. That's good boy. It's a good example of how to get that shoulder into the outside rein, which will be our goal with riding.